Okay, and we are back for the second episode of our Watchmen podcast, where we're going to discuss episode 2 and 3. And we were discussing this briefly before we started the podcast. Preston, you were not a fan of episode 2, but you liked episode 3 a lot.
No, I mean, episode 2 was okay. I just thought episode 1 and 3 were a lot more intense.
I agree.
A lot more action. 2 had more world building, getting into some background on, who this Will was, what exactly were Reparations, the world they live in and stuff like that. And also, we were kind of suspecting some things in episode 1, and it's just kind of a lot of the building of our suspicions in episode 1 continue in episode 2. So we're not learning anything new. For instance, finding the clan robe in Judd's closet, we kind of suspected something was off with Judd. I mean, it's built into his name so Judd has the villain's name from Oklahoma the musical, but he actually has a line that says, "Oh, I played the hero." And so you're like, well, did he plays the hero, but he's actually the villain? Is that the statement being made?
So isn't that what young Will was I don't know if that was Will or Will's caretaker, but
yeah.
Remember that little black boy in the very beginning of episode 1 was watching the tale of the I forgot the movie he was watching, but in the movie, didn't the vigilante take the bad guy out, and the bad guy was the marshal who wears white?
Yeah.
Paralleling Judd.
Yeah, there's so many parallels and callbacks.
Oh God, yeah.
It's getting really dense that it's really almost any scene now, because there's so many callbacks to other things that you can read almost anything into it now. Because he's cram packing everything.
Is that now? Yeah. I was going to ask you about that real quick. Is that a little suffocating? Because I was actually thinking about doing like all the Easter eggs in Watchmen, but I felt
there's too many.
There's way too many. Like if I leave one out, like I'm going to get called out in the comments section to death by people like, "You forgot about that one. You're not a fan." It's like,
I mean, there's just these random things where someone will say Dr. Manhattan's name, and then some coffee maker will be blue, and it's just there's so much at all times. Like it is a little much. But the creator, Damon Lindelof, he said that he believed that the Watchmen comic was that packed, and so with every panel having something in it, and so he felt like he needed to do the same thing. But he also did. He's also just prone to do that. In Lost and The Leftovers, there's a lot of stuff crammed in there. Some of it means something, and sometimes it doesn't mean anything, and you're just sitting there scratching your head, overanalyzing everything, not making, not sure, what it really means. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot in both episode 2 and 3. I mean, just even the beginning where, they're in World War I, and the flyers are
the Germans
coming down. Yeah. So this is a real German flyer from history. Like, this wasn't a fictitious thing. Yes, the Germans would fly planes over and drop propaganda over the black troops, and that would say like, "Oh, your life in America kind of sucks. Like in Germany, like black people are treated as equals," which is very funny considering the rise of the Nazi Party happens later. But that was a real thing, and so he was placing. I think that's Will's father is in World War I, and then he writes on that flyer, "Take care of this boy," and gets the boy out of the Tulsa riots. If you're trying to analyze the scene, it seems to be like, okay, this is talking about how we all have history and heritage, and all of this leads to our protagonist, Regina King, and so we're seeing like where Regina King came from, in this opening, like going from a soldier to the Tulsa riots to, her and her life, going to Vietnam I guess she was born in Vietnam and raised in Vietnam, but it was an American state, and then, all of these things happening to her. I don't know how much it really has to do with the plot, other than establishing like a backstory to Regina King's characters.
Right.
To, what's her name? Dirk's sister?
Sister Knight.
Sister Knight, yeah. Establishing a backstory to Sister Knight.
So let's start there. So the episode opens with, Judd is hanging and the old man is taking Will. He's taking credit for it. So she takes him back to the bakery and all that stuff, and she cuffs him. And when she comes back later, he's uncuffed and he's cooking eggs. And
Right.
Did you notice he reaches into the pot of boiling water and picks out the egg? Did you notice that?
No, so it wasn't boiling at all?
I believe it was boiling, actually. Let me double check here real quick. I have the episode right here with me. Yes, the pan is boiling. Like, I see, like, the steam coming off it. So this and his attire, the red attire. Not to mention the fact that at one point a lot of the characters are watching TV and they're watching the show American Hero Story, I believe, and it's about the Hooded Justice.
Yeah.
Right. In the American Hero Story, the Hooded Justice, you can clearly see it's a white guy with blue eyes, but it's a reenactment. This could also imply here, because the Hooded Justice is wearing red, and he has the noose around his neck. I guess the implication here is that Will was the Hooded Justice.
I see, and they when in the reenactment, they just they put in the wrong race for him.
I guess people don't remember the guy was always wearing a mask, so I guess nobody really knew who the Hooded Justice really was.
But why would he be able to pick a hot egg out of a pot without?
maybe because when he was beating the shit out of those guys, I guess he's beaten up so many guys that I guess he's lost feeling in his hands.
Oh, maybe. Or he's really Dr. Manhattan, like he claims.
I remember my grandmother. She used to work in the fields, and she always worked with her hands, and she had like one of those like tough hands and stuff. I remember she could do boiling water. Like she wouldn't feel it. She would do the dishes with like incredibly hot water, and wouldn't bother her at all. So yeah, so I'm assuming him beating the shit out of people for many years as the Hooded Justice, just his hands just don't give a fuck. Or maybe he does have some superpowers, or maybe he is Dr. Manhattan. That was weird. The fact that, that was the whole thing throughout the entire episode, that people are saying, Dr. Manhattan could be, somehow in disguise, but he can't take human shape. He can walk on the sun, but he can't look like a human?
No, he definitely can. He chose not to.
But why is Angela and her husband saying, that Dr. Manhattan can't, look like a human?
I mean, he certainly can. It's ridiculous that he couldn't. He's omnipotent. He can do whatever he wants. Of course he can.
Right.
He can take. Yeah, I don't understand it.
But everybody's saying he can't. So I'm like, what? So he can walk on the sun, but he can't do this one thing? That would be fucking hilarious. I don't know if it's a plot hole, but that's hilarious if you can't.
Or they're lampshading something.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. But that set up the whole mystery. Is Dr. Manhattan secretly a character in the show? I actually like that. That's a good setup right there.
Yeah, I mean this all the jumps to the very end as well. Well, they do all these things the car getting picked up and then obviously in the next episode getting dropped out, and it's is it getting dropped from the owl or is it getting dropped from Dr. Manhattan? Mm-hmm. And you don't know. Everything's left as a mystery. There's a lot of mystery to everything. All these things that we're looking at, none of it really makes much sense. Hopefully we'll have some answers in the end, but Damon Lindelof, he doesn't usually answer all of the questions. Mm-hmm. Even as Lost, hardly anything was answered, and then in the leftovers, 75% of stuff was answered, but there's definitely some things that were never answered in the leftovers, where you're like, what? An earthquake happened that randomly that had this one guy survive, and there's not supposed to be supernatural events going on, so I don't know. We'll see about this whole pulling an egg out of a boiling water, if that's ever discussed or
he did say
out.
he could he did say he had psychic abilities or telekinesis, something like that, if I recall correctly.
Right, and that's another callback to the comic book. So in the comic book, the big joke is none of the superheroes have any powers except for Dr. Manhattan, mm-hmm. but there is some mention that there might be psychics out there. And so, some people wonder if there's actually psychics because they mentioned it.
I thought the boy, Angela's adopted son, I forgot his name, Topher, I believe. I thought he was a psychic because when she goes up there, there's like something floating in front of him. He like built like a thing that was floating, but I guess that's just technology. That's just a piece of...
Yeah, it was just a toy.
Yeah.
Right.
But it looked like he was using his abilities.
Right, but then at the same time, like, there's no cell phones or something, you know?
So if you notice, like pagers are still a thing, beepers are still a thing, and newspapers are still selling, like, you know, off the shelves.
Right.
So, and there was one thing I didn't catch, someone caught for me. 9/11 never happened. So the Twin Towers are still a thing. And, it's, how many stars are on the flag again? I'm just curious.
Oh, I haven't looked or counted, but...
Right. It looked like a lot of fucking stars are on there.
Right. I mean, obviously, so it's an alternate universe, but an alternate universe where certain technologies went advanced and certain technologies didn't. Mm-hmm. So clear, there doesn't seem to be an internet. There doesn't seem to be cell phones, but at the same time, like, people have owl ships and hovercrafts and that weird toy, which seemed pretty interesting.
Right.
So certain things are just more advanced and certain things are less advanced. So they're just going, it's an alternate history where different things happened.
Well, the theory behind that is that Dr. Manhattan, all the technology brought about because of, like, his existence, and ever since, like, he went away, I guess there's a shift away from it.
Right, but I mean, there's still, the owl was still around. Ozymandias was still around. They still had their things. Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
So, back to Judd real quick.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm assuming, I figured something wasn't right with Judd. I just figured. I'm assuming Judd is a white supremacist, but he's on a different group of white supremacy. He's not with the 7th Cavalry, but more of a secret underground white supremacist group that are at odds with the 7th Cavalry. They have the same goal, but they can't agree on how to go about that goal, whatever it may be.
Well, this all gets into the politics of Keene, right? So this Keene guy is running for president against Redford.
Right.
So I'm assuming that Keene was being supported by the New Frontiersman. And the New Frontiersman we know is a right-wing racist newspaper. So I'm assuming that Keene is a right-wing racist fascist. Mm-hmm. And Redford is left-wing. That, especially considering that Redford put in Redfordations, we can just kind of assume that. So if Judd's wife was working on Keene's campaign, at least Judd's wife is right-wing. And so it does make sense that Judd would be right-wing too, because he's married to a right-wing woman who worked on a right-wing campaign and all this. But it also seems so simple that Judd would be evil, like so obvious.
Like I said, I guess the twist is that once again, maybe the 7th Cavalry are being used as like the scapegoat, as like they're the true enemies. Don't look at us. That's what I'm assuming is happening here. Judd is part of the true white supremacist evil group, and that they're just using the 7th Cavalry as scapegoats. That way, no one takes a look at them.
Right. I mean, they're trying to do something. He obviously has some sort of secret conspiracy plan. But I have to say, obvious mysteries throw me off. I'm always like, well, that was so obvious. Like, there must be something more to it.
Right.
And then sometimes there's not. Like, take the mystery of Jeremy Irons' identity. Okay, the first time we see Jeremy Irons, he's clearly Ozymandias. Mm-hmm. Clearly. And then they wait until the 3rd freaking episode before they confirm that it's Ozymandias. And you're like, why? Like, why did you even wait? Like, why do you even have that scene in the 3rd episode where he announces his name? Like, we all knew you were Ozymandias. Like, so, yeah, Judd being evil, like, it's so obvious in the 1st episode that, especially when his name is freaking evil, that I almost feel like there must be a double twist. She finds a clan robe in his closet, and it's like, well, maybe he's not really. I mean, she even is like, this is ridiculous. Somebody's setting him up, and so it seems too obvious for him to be evil. But then again, I mean, so many things point to him being part of the right-wing fascists, like his wife working on the Keane campaign. So maybe he is just evil, and we just have to accept that.
I'm telling you, man, that's the ultimate like bad guy underground thing. Like, create a separate organization that's bad, so the eyes are off us and more on them. That's why he was, because at first I was like, he's probably part of the 7th Cavalry, but then I realized that would be a little too obvious. So he's so in disguise within the police organization that he's like going out of his way to kill his own comrades. Bullshit. The 7th Cavalry are just a bunch of like dumbass. It's like that one part in American History X, where I believe Edward Norton's character is like, I think he gets compared. It's been a while since I saw that movie, but I remember one scene where they get compared to his group to the Klan, and he's like, no, they're just a bunch of dumb fuck rednecks. Like, we have a plan.
Yeah,
I think that's what I'm assuming is happening here. The 7th Cavalry are just a bunch of dumb Nixonville residents who are just pissed off and using Rorschach/QAnon. The whole identity is like, a front, and the true villain, the true evil is behind the scenes, and they're the ones like, who are supposed to be your friends.
Speaking of Nixonville, this is another heavy-handed scene, and this gets into a few of the reasons why I didn't think episode 2 is as strong as episode 1-3. But so Nixonville, they have this scene where the police arrive, and in Nixonville they have this ridiculous statue of Nixon. And they say, okay, if you don't do what we want, we're gonna destroy your god. And the communist, like Red Scare, like this left winger decides to like pull down like Nixon and like and destroy him, and you're like, okay, they're trying to make some sort of statement here about left-wingers bringing down the gods of the right-wingers, but it's like, and it seems really heavy-handed, but I'm not sure what they're actually trying to say. Like, it was just, there's clearly some symbolism going on, but I'm not sure what the symbolism meant. Did you get that feeling?
I'm just surprised that a guy who openly says he's a communist is regularly hanging out with these fucking people, like Americans in general. Have you noticed that?
It was all really silly because I mean, I'm watching him with my wife, and she's like, if he's like the one Eastern European guy in Tulsa, like, why does he wear a mask? Isn't it obvious who he is? Like, aren't they gonna come after him? Like,
maybe he's not really Eastern European at all. He just puts it on. Maybe that's the persona.
Just puts on the accent. I mean,
the accent comes with the mask, kind of like when Christian Bale's Batman. I'm Batman. Like, maybe when he puts it on, he sounds like this. Is that Eastern European, or that I don't know what accent that was, but I just
I have to see scenes with him without his mask on.
Right.
Maybe he takes it off and he's like, "Hi, I'm Jerry," and you're like, "Oh." You're not Russian at all.
I just find it weird that, like, this fucking guy, like, the Russians were, like, I guess this is the state of U.S.-Russian relationships, where, I guess the Soviet Union is still kind of the Soviet Union. The fall of the Soviet Union never really happened, I believe, so, and because of the whole, like, the squid thing, the U.S. and the Russians are really, like, together on this whole, like, world peace thing, and, like, they're friendly enough to where communists can regularly walk around just fine.
I guess. I mean, where I live, it's not like people would be angry and attack a guy walking around in communist attire. They'd just be like, "Oh, that's weird."
But in that world, they were on the brink of war with these guys, literally on the brink of war, to the point where.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Like, the Soviet Union still exists in this world, but then again, it's been a long time since peace, so I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the thing, is the alternate world has been going on for so long that you're not sure of the tensions. Like, yeah, we can kind of imagine there are some, racial tensions, white-black tensions over reparations and stuff, but we're not getting all of the international tensions, like what it all means.
And also in the episode, Ozymandias, of course, Adrian Veidt, we get the confirmation that this is either a simulation or he's off somewhere, but those people are clearly clones. Mr. Phillips and Miss Crookshanks, I love that name.
Yeah.
They're
Like with the play.
The
we
play.
first have the play.
Mm-hmm. The play is essentially all about the Watchmaker's son, which is Joel Osterman.
It's odd because now we're combining like what's going on in like episode 2 and episode 3. Because in episode 2, when I watched episode 2, and Jeremy Irons is watching this play and he's just so into it, and he's got all these clones, and he passed that tomato tree, and you're like, okay, clearly, I thought Jeremy Irons is off at some sort of deserted area, and he's been cloning people, and he's obsessed with Dr. Manhattan, and he's been putting on this play because he just has nothing better to do, and he's insane. And then the next episode, you realize that actually he's a prisoner. And you're like,
well, before we get to the next episode, let's, on
yeah.
a scale from 1 to 10, what would you give episode 2? I believe a 7, because I gave episode 1 a 7, I believe. I would give this one a 7 as well. It wasn't that bad. It was just, it was whatever.
I mean, I gave episode 1 like a 7 or an 8, right?
I believe you gave it an 8.
I gave it an 8, and I would give episode 2 a 6. I'd drop it down a bit. I just thought it was not as interesting. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are these scenes between Sister Knight and Will, and you're wondering who is this weird guy. But I didn't find those scenes that engaging. I didn't find her going to the Reparations Museum that interesting, because I'd already figured out that, that people are getting money for past violence, probably for Tulsa or whatever. I didn't need an entire museum to explain that to me the next episode when it was kind of apparent,
right?
That this kind of thing happened. Apparently there's even more backstory to it. Like Lindelof in interviews said that the Reparations was a way to stave off giving more money out. So in real life, Johnny Cochran, O.J. Simpson's lawyer,
right?
He actually represented some people from Oklahoma who sued the state of Oklahoma for reparations related to the related to the Tulsa riots. Mm-hmm. And it got to the Oklahoma Supreme Court, and they ruled that descendants don't suffer the trauma of the people that went through it. They said that essentially they don't have standing.
Right.
So, for instance, say your mom is beaten up, and you can't go in and sue for damages because you're not suffering from your mother getting beaten.
Right.
Is the idea.
Mm-hmm.
Which people could argue the other way, that no, these things do pass down generationally. People's economic situations, the trauma they felt.
Right.
People have trauma, and then they enact that trauma upon their children and things like this. So there's an argument that.
But that's hard to prove, though. Like let's say Angela's family was impacted by the Tulsa riots.
Yeah.
Let's say they were successful people. Let's say her grandfather was successful and he was in the Tulsa riots and it made him a poor man. What's to say that if the riots never happened, that his successfulness would have gone down? Maybe he could have made a bad business deal, and it's really hard to prove that success would have continued on, because there are plenty of people who get rich and do well for themselves and their business just goes down, or something happens to their money, or some unforeseen circumstance.
Right. I mean, there obviously there is, at least on average, trauma that's passed down, and the proof in this is just that descendants of slaves in America earn less money than people that aren't descendants of slaves in America. So there does seem to be some sort of trauma that has been passed down in some way, some sort of socioeconomic cycle. That communities are caught in, and a lot of people would point to and say, like Barack Obama is a great example of how if you're not descended from a slave, you don't have that trauma, and you can completely rise and become super successful and stuff like this. And so this world essentially the Johnny Cochran case went the other way. That the court ruled that no, descendants do have standing, and you can sue for damages that happened to your ancestor. And so that's what's going on.
And I like what Lindelof said about, like, only giving reparations to the people that were affected in the Tulsa riots minimizes getting a lot of money out.
Right, and it's not just Tulsa. Like, it's other, it's this list of whatever, 100 or 150 different specific incidences of racial violence.
Oh, there's more incidents that Reparations gives out money towards.
There are,
Ooh.
but it's still less than slavery in general. They're not giving money out because they said, what he was saying is that it would bankrupt the government to give out money to every single descendant of a slave. So in order to stave off that, they picked specific incidences of racial violence that happened in history and gave money just to those people and then claimed, we gave you reparations. So that's the story that's going on. That it's not reparations for slavery. It's trying to get around giving out reparations for slavery by giving reparations for
some people.
To some people for specific incidences of racial violence.
Isn't that the best, have your cake and eat it too scenario, though? I mean, you can't give it out to everybody because the government would, of course, but you can give it out to some people. I mean, Isn't that the best scenario here?
Yeah, I mean, it's, better to give out money to some people than no people, but but yeah, there is a dark side to it that we wanted to get away from being liable for something big, slavery, by admitting liability to some other things. So Lindelof put a lot of thought into everything.
He did.
I admit, every scene is like, holy crap. And then you're like, oh my God, there's so much sensitivity to each little thing. And it's like bringing all this stuff up.
It's a well-crafted show. It's a very well-crafted show. And you know what? I'm going to change my score. I would actually give it a 6 as well. Thinking back on it now, I didn't enjoy it as much as I did episode 1 and 3. You're correct. But episode 3, let's get into it. It opens up with Agent Laurie Blake, or Laurie Blake, right? I said that name right. Yes, Laurie Blake.
Yes. Played by the very famous Jean Smart.
Jean Smart. And she goes into a bank, tries to rob it to lure out a vigilante, and she ends up shooting the vigilante in the back. She's no nonsense. And when she goes back to her apartment, we later find out that she is the...
You could never do that in real life. That's the whole thing was entrapment, but whatever.
Right. I guess the anti-vigilante task force, they're given special
right.
permission to do whatever to catch these guys. But she goes back to her apartment, and we find out that the Senator Keene, you said his name was?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
He comes to see her, and we find out that she's the second Silk Spectre. Her mom was the first one. So if she's the second Silk Spectre, that means her boyfriend was Dr. Manhattan, which is later confirmed, and her father was the comedian.
Yes. And actually her being working for the government as this hit that goes and takes down costume heroes, that was the comedian's job.
Oh.
And so the turn on this is we always think of Silk Spectre being Silk Spectre 2, following after her in her mother's footsteps. The twist here is that she's following in her father's footsteps instead. That she's not really Silk Spectre 2, she's really the comedian 2.
Huh, I like that.
That's the twist.
Yeah, I like that. So I was actually, I'll save this for later because I thought this was fucking hilarious. Throughout the entire episode, she's trying to contact Dr. Manhattan. So apparently there are multiple phone booths across the country that go off into Mars, and you're supposed to leave a message for Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah, I guess they see. I imagine they're novelty things. I mean, they're pretty big for being for being novelty joke things, like send a message to Dr. Manhattan, but yeah, I guess they exist. People really want to know that somebody's listening.
Right.
That God's listening.
And she goes off. She gets assigned to Tulsa, and she right off the bat.
By the way, as someone who interviews people for a living. Like I interview people for information. Like this is a huge part of my job. She's horrible at interviewing people.
Really? You think so?
So whenever you interview someone, you don't want to make one of the prime things is you don't want to come off as hostile or adversarial, because someone that sees their interviewer as adversarial is more likely to clam up and say nothing. So like her going in and like just being a complete asshole, like it's just a horrible way to go about interviewing people. Like what information are you going to get out of people if you're acting like a big threatening asshole? But nothing. You want to go in and act like
they're your friend.
That you're there to help and you're a friend and that you're on their side and that you're going to be helpful. It's much better play. It's best to play good cop, good cop. The fact that she just goes in and acts like a dick. I mean, I laughed my ass off at all of it, but it was just so funny.
So she gets in there, and she's essentially, she takes no shit. She gets in there, she gets into Tulsa, and she is trying to get information. And the funeral for Judd is underway. And during the funeral, a suicide bomber tries to take the senator hostage. Now, once again, this is why I'm thinking that the senator and Judd were all part of like the same secret underground a white supremacy group that's in conflict with the 7th Cavalry, because of course they're trying
to... Yeah, that was just horrible security. Like how on earth...
Yes, I agree.
Like how on earth, like wouldn't you have somebody in that mausoleum the whole time?
Right.
Like just the horrible security. But, by the way, also, dumping the exploding body into the grave was a great idea. Putting the coffin on top, horrible idea. So, but yeah, you want the explosion to go upward, which it would. But then why would you put in like shrapnel that could hurt people? Like you just put in like an object. Like had she not done that, the explosion would just be pushing air upward into the sky. Throwing in the coffin, that just creates a whole bunch of like wooden shrapnel that's gonna like spray out and like hurt people.
But wouldn't the wooden shrapnel spray upwards as well? Not like because if she left the coffin there next to the hole, then that means there's a chance that the explosion could have knocked the coffin back and the shrapnel would have spread out more than it would have if the coffin was inside the hole, right?
No, I mean the force has to go into something, and so the force is either going to go into air, and you're pushing air, and air pushing into somebody. When close enough, air pushing into you can really hurt you, but force going into the wood, especially sharp wood in tiny little pieces, it's going to be a lot worse. Now, granted, you're right that if it's pushing up, maybe it doesn't matter, but the coffin. If it successfully only pushes up and, some piece of wood doesn't fly in some sort of odd trajectory, but there's no point in pushing the coffin in. Just have the, if you go into, if you're in, say, a city like Washington, D.C., and you look at the trash cans and public transportation, you'll notice that they're very thick all the way around, and there's no lid. And that's for a reason. It's actually for the exact same situation as that bomb at that graveyard. Like you want the explosion to go up, straight up, where it won't hurt anybody, and no lid, no shrapnel, just nothing. The outside ring is tough enough that it's not going to break, and so the explosion will just go straight up.
Huh.
And so yeah.
So the funeral happens when she pushes the casket in there. I'm like, oh my god, holy shit, that was Jesus.
That was a cool scene.
Overall,
it was a cool scene. I love the scene.
And
I'm being a know-it-all, but by being like, I shouldn't have put the coffin.
No, you're fine. But that was fairly intense. I kind of like that. But it kind of shocked me a little. Like, oh my god. But okay.
And Silk Spectre is like, I thought she was bluffing. Oh man.
We also get kind of hints, by the way, with Silk Spectre. Keen is trying to convince her to go there by saying, I'll help you get your owl friend out of jail.
Yeah, so the owl seems to be in jail, which is I don't know why. I guess because he continued to be a masked vigilante, and that's illegal in the world.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but when she breaks up with Dr. Manhattan, doesn't she like have a relationship with the owl guy?
She does.
Mm-hmm. And I guess she takes the job because she wants to get him out of prison. And I'm wondering if she still has contact with Ozymandias, or Ozymandias go completely like off the grid. Because at one point her partner says he heard a rumor that Ozymandias is somewhere in Argentina, and he like got a huge plot of land and is just doing like whatever.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's really tough to know, like, where Ozymandias is. Like, who is keeping him prisoner? Like, it's very clear that he's trying to escape.
So I have a theory about this. Before we get to Ozymandias' scenes, the one thing I wanted to talk about with Silk Spectre is, like, she goes back into her apartment at the beginning of the episode, and she has this, like, silver briefcase. I'm like, oh, something, like, really, like, the connection, maybe a secret connection to Dr. Manhattan. No, it was a giant blue dildo.
Yeah, giant novelty blue dildo. Yeah. That she decides not to use, and then she has sex with, like,
Petey?
The fanboy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the fanboy.
She has him wear the mask.
Oh, I didn't see that, really?
Yeah. Wait, let me check.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. His little Lone Ranger mask. That's funny.
And then the car comes down, and
God, there's some daddy issues there, because Comedian used to wear a mask like that.
I actually, really? Okay.
Yeah, gross, yeah.
Okay, oh, Jesus Christ. And as she's walking away from her phone call, the car comes down. Now, I guess the whole phone booth thing was in Tulsa the entire time, I think?
Yeah, I guess so.
Or if it wasn't, then maybe that's what ultimately convinces her to go to Tulsa, because that's Angela's car.
Right, and it's odd. She looks up and she laughs and thinks it's Dr. Manhattan. But of course, the last time we saw it, it was getting picked up by a magnet, which makes us think it was picked up by an owl machine. And so if it's dropped, it seems like it was dropped by an owl machine. So she is, I don't know if she's incorrectly thinking it's Dr. Manhattan when it was fact an owl.
Well, as she's looking away, she sees that it's as she's looking away, she sees like a little
flash in the sky.
Yeah, right. So
I'm not sure if she's supposed to think it's Mars or if she knows it's an owl machine.
So there has to be my thought here is that Will has to be kind of like the mentor of some secret like underground hero group or something, like some secret underground like Owlman like fanboys, because there's no way this guy's psychic.
Well, that would be interesting. That there's Rorschach fanboys out there, but that there's also owl fanboys. There's so many possibilities now. I mean, now that they've introduced clones, and granted, clones were in the original Watchmen comic, but now that there's clones, like, I do wonder, is Judd even dead? Or is that was that a Judd clone?
Well, let's get into Ozymandias and like his whole thing. So we start off, he's like trying to build something. It looks like he was trying to build a spacesuit.
Yeah, or at least something to get out of his prison. So,
you keep saying it's a prison. Who keeps him there? So when I watched the episode, Miss Crookshanks, while he's meditating, Miss Crookshanks comes in. I watched the episode with subtitles on. And I'm trying to get to it real quick. Let me...
Sorry to disturb you, Master. But there's a letter.
Can you hear it?
Yeah.
From the Game Warden.
Read it to me.
So as she starts reading it...
See what our adversary has to say for himself.
He calls this person the adversary. Hold on. As she reads it, he stops her.
Dear...
No dispense.
So on the subtitle, she says, Dear Ma... And he stops her. It says, Dear M.A.S. So it seems like the Game Warden is calling Adrian Veidt Master. Who calls him Master? Mr. Phillips and Miss Crookshanks. What I'm assuming here is that there is nobody keeping him there. He's keeping himself there because he gets bored. That's why he put on the play, because of course, and he has one of his Mr. Phillips clones as the quote-unquote adversary, because at the very end of his scene in this episode, he puts on his Ozymandias mask and his outfit. So I guess in order to cure his own boredom, he's kind of like, really just creating his own adversary to fight against every once in a while.
So you're saying, oh, that's clever. That he's not in a prison. I mean, he's a prison of his own making.
Yes.
But you're saying he's created his own opponent.
Not to mention, so when he's riding to go get the bison, they're bison, right? Not buffalo, or they're buffalo? I think they look like bison.
Well, so in America, the word bison and buffalo are synonymous.
Okay.
But in different countries, there are different types of buffalo and bison. But American buffalo and American bison are synonymous terms.
Okay. Yeah. So when he was going off to hunt, the little sign there was almost like a cartoonish like Skull and Bones thing, and the guy sends him a letter with the stamp that has the same sign. It's like it's clearly, if this was like a real keep out sign, it wouldn't have a cartoonish green Skull and Bones. It would be like an actual legit official sign to keep out, and this isn't. So, and we never see the game warden's face. We never see his face, and well.
Yeah, it could be another Mr. Phillips. Some people think is the leather of the suit, was that actually tanned human skin, that he put together. Does he only have infinite Crookshanks and Phillips to deal with? He grows his clothes.
No, but I'm thinking that he's gone. I don't want to say he's gone insane, but he's clearly trying to, I guess, reach Dr. Manhattan. Yeah. Because,
well, flying to Mars, that's just. I mean, it sounds like his guy is freezing by trying to go into the air and getting frozen. But flying to Mars, that would take years.
So there's one thing I also forgot to mention that was a kind of like a cute little thing. I actually looked this up here. Let me go back to the thing real quick. Okay, it's right here. So when Senator Keene is giving the interview after the funeral attacks, one of the reporters says, what's his opinion on the Russians trying to build their own intrinsic field generator? The intrinsic field, or I think this might be an error, but the intrinsic field subtractor was the machine that Dr. Manhattan goes into. I called him Joel Osterman earlier. It's John Osterman.
Oh, so they're trying to create their own Dr. Manhattan.
I guess. So that's the one thing I know. I'm like, intrinsic field, what the Russians are trying, and I looked it up. The Watchmen wiki says it's the intrinsic field subtractor, and it's a machine that utilizes radiation to remove intrinsic fields from solid objects. Typically, the object subjected to the machine's process is disintegrated. The machine is first introduced in Watchmen 4, Watchmaker, when John Osterman reports to Gilead Flats, blah, 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 blah. He runs and studies many experiments using the subtractor until one day, he's accidentally locked in the main chamber and obliterated by radiation when the program cannot be overwritten. Overridden, I'm sorry. So, yeah, apparently the Russians are trying to build their own, and that gets quickly brushed aside.
Yeah, well, that would be a huge freaking big deal to have a second Dr. Manhattan out there. Mm-hmm. Oh, God. Oh.
So, the episode essentially is pretty awesome. I actually really liked it. The introduction of Silk Spectre, I thought it was this new character was kind of be like, ugh, here we go, but I actually like her. I actually do.
So the third episode is very well. I mean, so episodes 1 and 2 try to do this a bit, but it's more obvious with the third one, and that is being focused around a single character. So the first episode is most focused around Judd, and the second episode is most focused around Sister Knight, and then the third character is focused around Silk Spectre. And that's very Damon Lindelof. He likes telling stories by having each episode be character driven around one. And this is how he did Lost a lot. Is how he did Leftovers. The overall story will move forward, but you kind of hop from perspective to perspective in order to advance the story. And it's a little different than, say, a lot of people say, well, how is that different than, say, Game of Thrones? I mean, Ice and Fire. And it's like, well, it's a little different because maybe the early chapters of Ice and Fire, you have a one story going and then through multiple perspectives, but it eventually just becomes you have 10 separate stories and then you're alternating them. You're getting back to what's happening with Tyrion. You're getting back to what's happening with Catelyn. There's not a continuous narrative. And so Lindelof is big into this like swapping perspective on the continuing narrative going forward, which is so next episode, it may be focused on a completely different character. We'll see.
I liked it. It was pretty good. I would give it an 8 out of 10. Not bad.
Yeah, no, I liked it too. I actually want to watch it again to see what I missed on this one, because it seems to be a lot.
And you know what's funny? Like just talking about this now, like the episode is almost an hour long. It's around like 50-something minutes, and it doesn't seem like anything. It doesn't seem like a lot happens, but I feel like I always miss a ton of things. It's almost as though like there's not a lot going on, because with Spectre, she does the bank thing, then goes to Tulsa. Yeah. And then goes to like the funeral, and then has that brief conversation with Angela. That's it. Once again with Ozymandias, just little stuff happen here and there. But I feel like there's also so much in the background jam packed that it just feels like enough happens. You know what I'm saying?
Well, what's funny is because we switched perspectives, like not very much happened with Sister Night. Yeah, Angela. And we're okay with that because we've switched to Silk Spectre, to Laurie, right? And so that's kind of the thing. You get to breathe from one plot by focusing on the second plot. I mean, her plot advanced a tiny bit, but not much. It's an interesting way of doing things, because in the third episode, you almost felt like you're outside of Sister Night. Like all of a sudden the protagonist felt like this background character who was, somewhere else. We didn't feel inside her head. We felt she had this tough exterior all of a sudden when we saw her, because you're seeing her through Silk Spectre's perspective. It was fun. I like how it's structured. I really love how The Leftovers did this.
You like the way it's structured like this, because it is kind of like Ice and Fire. It'd be like having...
It is.
It'd be like having like Tyrion for an entire like point of view chapter, and having him interact with another point of view chapter from his point of view, and so on and so forth. Like, yeah. Like it's really like that.
It is. I mean, and you only have a few examples of this. Like when you're reading a Tyrion chapter and then Sansa's in it. And Sansa seems so distant, and you're like, what's going on with her? And she seems so odd and stone. But when you're in a Sansa chapter, you have all of Sansa's thoughts. So it's so different. And meanwhile, Tyrion from that perspective is going to be, not readable. And so it's, yeah, I mean, like I said, it happens in those first few in those first few chapters of Game of Thrones. It happens with the Tyrion Sansa chapters in A Clash of Kings and A Storm of Swords, and then it happens a little bit with the Quentyn and Daenerys. When you swap to Daenerys' perspective from Quentyn's, but those instances are actually kind of few and far between. But it is like Ice. I mean, I'll say I do like those parts of Ice and Fire when the stories when the point of views cross over, So, yeah, I like it. It's fun. So
in our last podcast episode, we said how I felt as though a lot of people outside the United States probably wouldn't be too much into this series, because it does focus a lot on American, political things and all that. But I'm going to kind of walk back on that a little bit. I do feel as though this would probably resonate with a lot of people outside the U.S. The only difference I would say is, if you don't know anything about Watchmen, watch the movie, and the only difference in the movie versus this is that in the movie, something happens with Dr. Manhattan, and in the show, something happens with him that doesn't happen in the movie, if you know what I'm talking about. Towards the very end with Ozymandias. I kind of don't want to spoil it, but if you're already watching, I mean, I guess spoiler alert, in the movie, Ozymandias kind of makes Dr. Manhattan the scapegoat for the whole getting the U.S. and the Russians to be, closer together, whereas in the comics, it's just the giant squid. So it mostly follows the comics. And if you don't want to read the comics, just watch the movie and then make that distinction. But no, I would recommend this to people outside the U.S. You don't have to be an American or even understand American politics too much to really enjoy it. I do highly recommend it now. Episode 3, this is the 3rd episode test. If after episode 3 you're not really hooked on it, then get off of it. Yeah. But I'm a little hooked. The mystery is starting to deepen. Episode 2 put out the mystery, like, is Dr. Manhattan secretly a part of the cast? Who could it be?
Yeah.
And the whole thing with Will.
It's amazing because every episode answers one question and then creates 10 more. Where you're like, what does that mean? And I've seen people ask in interviews, like, are things going to come together in the end? And he claims that it's going to be self-contained. That by the end of episode 9, it's only going to be 9 episodes, not 10. That things will be answered. So
I hope we do get a season 2, but if we do get a season 2, I hope they don't do what Westworld is doing, where Westworld season 2 was so convoluted and so just up their own ass. You agree with me. You know what I'm talking about.
Well, Westworld season 2, they tried. They tried to make it as complicated as season 1, and it kind of got convoluted. It was very convoluted.
It's one of those. Westworld season 2, I felt as though would have worked better, the structure of it, if it was a Netflix series, because Netflix releases all the episodes at once. If you could binge Westworld season 2 in a row, you'd kind of understand it a little bit better. But
it's just not as fun, though. I mean, the best part of Westworld is like theorizing with people week to week about what's happening, what's going to happen.
I would argue that was fun for season 1, even though I wasn't here for season 1. I could have seen how it was fun for season 1 because I was watching it with someone, and like she already had seen it. And she was like, ooh, what did you think about this? And when I was theorizing with her privately as I was going through it myself, like 1 episode a day. But with season 2, not really. There weren't a lot of... I don't remember there being a lot of theories in regards to season 2 as much as there was season 1.
Yeah. It's funny, my mom was down here visiting the baby. And so she was looking for something to watch. So I had her watch the beginning of Westworld. And it's funny because she's just... So, like, she doesn't search the internet afterwards for theories and all of this. So, but it's just, she's just watching it like a, regular, naive human being. And it's funny how much, like, what she gets and catches on to and what she's missing. And it's hilarious, So it's hilarious because, she hasn't figured out yet the 2 timelines. She's like, I don't understand. Everything's jumping around. It's really confusing. And I was like, yeah, how's that person was alive and now they're dead and then they're alive again? I don't know how that's possible. You're like, okay.
And I hope that's what we get from because with Westworld season 1, when you're done, it's like watching it over again. Like you get like it clicks a bit more. Like you start noticing certain things. Yeah. I hope that's what we get with Watchmen season 1. After Watchmen season 1 is done, we go back and Watchmen season 1 again, and like it starts clicking in there for you. But overall, I would give this episode an 8. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was awesome. You enjoyed it as well. You give it an 8.
Yeah, I give it an 8. Yeah, so far, I still don't think it's as good as Leftovers, but I do think this is a really exciting show, and I mean, I like it a lot. I'm really looking forward to the next episode. I don't think it's quite as good as Leftovers, which is funny.
Not yet, but we're only on 3 episodes. Maybe you might change your mind once we get to episode 9, because I feel like there's way more good stuff coming. HBO has really put an emphasis on a lot of the supernatural stuff recently, especially with the advent of the success of Thrones. So maybe we might see Dr. Manhattan, and maybe him coming out of nowhere and revealing himself to be this, and this. Maybe that might be like what tips it over the edge for you in regards to Leftovers.
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to an interview with Lindelof, and he was talking about how much he wanted it to be adjacent to the Watchmen universe, and how much he wanted to just be like, fuck it. This is the Watchmen universe. I'm going to use the Watchmen characters. And so, like, in that first episode where we don't really have anybody, like, in the show, Dr. Manhattan is off on Mars, and it's like, yeah, this this terrorist group is acting in a worship sense of Rorschach, but other than that, and somebody was using an owl ship, but everything was adjacent to Watchmen. Episode 3 is the first time, and even Jeremy Irons is off in this other world separate from everything. So episode 3 is the first time we're like, oh, like the Watchmen are here, they're characters. Like it's about them. Like this is no longer a Watchmen adjacent story. This is Watchmen, you know, with Silk Spectre's part of it, you know, and we're talking about like doing stuff with Owl and, you know, and doing things for Owl. So we'll see how it goes.
Well, episode 3, like you said, it does open it up, like, you know, the bigger, broader scope, introduces all these new people. So, yeah, hopefully they keep doing that. I want to know what's going on here, and here. There's so many stars in the American flag. I want to know more about the world, and this does a bit of world building as well. So, yeah, no, we'll just have to see. Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap it up?
No. I think, though, I just want to apologize to everyone because Carmine and I were all over the map because the episodes are so confusing and there's so much going on and it's so dense. We're hopping from event to event. Like, had you not watched the show and you were listening to us, like nothing would make sense right now. Like, but if you've seen the episodes, it's there's a lot going on, and so it's just we're kind of jumping around on events and themes and everything. It's really rich. It's a rich show. Unlike, say, the last few seasons of Game of Thrones, where just an episode happens and nothing happens. You know, you just have these non-episodes where, you know, people have entire scenes of eating and staring at each other and not saying anything. You know, like there's so much has happened in every episode, and there's so much going on that it's quite amazing.
Mm-hmm. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. As always, we will be back next week with the next episode of Watchmen. We will try to get these out more frequently. We were a little busy last week, mostly me. But yeah, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you all next time. Have a good one.